Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I am your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Todd Payne. Todd Payne is a seasoned relationship coach with over 25 years of experience, specializing in self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and the Enneagram. His unconventional journey from ministry to coaching has given him unique insights into human behavior, which he uses to help individuals and couples achieve lasting transformation. After a life-changing sabbatical and a devastating wildfire, Todd relocated to Portugal, where he now thrives as an emotional intelligence coach. Today, he continues to guide clients towards profound personal and relational growth, drawing on his extensive experience and deep commitment to helping others. And with that, Todd, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It is a pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you, Dave, for having me. It's a real joy to be here. I'm delighted.
And we were talking prior to recording. It is 60 degrees in Portugal and sunny. And
Yeah.
I wish where I am in upstate New York, it's about 10 degrees and sunny. So the only commonality we got is that it's sunny. Otherwise, there's a 50-degree difference, and we're well in the middle of winter.
Yeah, this is winter for us too. This is not an abnormal day here to have some sun and some warmth here in the winter.
Trust me, my heart goes out to you that you're dealing with 60-degree weather in February. So
I know, it's how it should be, right? It's how it should be.
absolutely. Absolutely, it should be. We met through a podcast agent, one of the better ones around, I believe, Noemi Barris. Noemi introduced me to you. Your background, particularly with your work with the Enneagram, intrigued me because as a college professor, I teach the Enneagram in one of the psychology courses that I teach at Pratt Munson School of Art in Utica, New York. And so I was anxious to take a deep dive into the Enneagram. So let's just see how it goes, and we'll see where
Great.
this goes. All right. So whenever you're ready, I'll shoot you the first question.
Let's have it.
All right. My first question is, please tell our audience about the experience that has shaped your life path and your life passions.
Boy, let me try to give you the Reader's Digest version because it's been a wild ride for me. But it really begins with a religious experience that I had in college. I was dating a girl who said, I want to go to church. Do you want to come? And you know how it is when you're dating a girl. You say, sure, I'll follow you anywhere. I was not raised in any religious tradition whatsoever. And when I went to church with this young woman, I had what can only be described as a religious experience. I spent the next several years trying to chase it. That took me to seminary, which is where I began my training for the ministry. And I start the story there because when I told my father that I wanted to become a minister, his response was, you can't be a minister. You're terrible with people. And part of my training for ministry was a year-long internship, at the end of which my supervisor wrote on my evaluation form, Todd has none of the gifts and skills essential for ministry. I was really not very good with people as a young, so bad that I didn't even know that I was bad with people. And through a series of interesting events, I did end up becoming ordained and spending 20 years in the ministry. And it was hard going for somebody with my very little skills with people. And I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. I like to call it the rock tumbler. But about 14 years in, I did get a sabbatical, and in the church that I was a part of, the sabbatical wasn't just a vacation. I was supposed to be improving myself somehow. And my bishop said, so what will you be doing? I said, I don't know, sleeping in. He said, I think you should study the Enneagram. And so he gave me a book and he pointed me toward a coach, and that really began my journey. And the Enneagram gave me a system, a structure, some traction for putting all the stuff I had learned over these years of being a minister into some sort of order to make use of it. Now all that stuff I had learned about empathy, compassion, the stuff that I had learned about how to help people communicate, to get along, to work together. The Enneagram, it was like, you remember those magic eye things that look like visual static, and then all of a sudden you let your eyes come out of focus and it becomes 3D. That's how dealing with people became for me. And after I really studied the Enneagram in depth, my marriage improved. I took it back and worked with my staff, my volunteers, my congregation. And I discovered what power it has to really be transformative for people and for relationships. Certainly it was for mine. So I decided I had enough of evenings and weekends and wanted to go on to a new chapter in my life. And I left the ministry and I began coaching. That was about 9 years ago now. I found that the Enneagram gives me something powerful and practical to put in people's hands to make effective and lasting change. And in that way, I continued to serve and to be who I was trained to be. But, now I don't have to get up on Sunday mornings to do it any longer. So those are sort of the highlights of what brought me here. I'll summarize by saying this. If you are failing math class, don't go to the student who's passing without doing the homework. Go to the other student who failed last year and is passing this year, because that's the one who's going to be able to show you the right steps, how to solve the problems, how to get the answers. And that's sort of how I see myself, but with people. I got it wrong for a long, long time. In-laws, marriage, business partnerships, my children. And now that I have the tools and the system, I can help other people avoid the headache of banging your head against the wall, not knowing what to do or how to approach these difficult things in life called relationships. So that's sort of the nutshell.
Well, that's quite an interesting nutshell of a journey from the seminary to coaching, and particularly using the Enneagram as a major focus of your coaching business. But I like that you alluded to the fact that you encourage people, talk to the person who's failed and is doing well now, because we learn more, I think, from our failures than we do from our successes. And that individual can
Sure.
tell you what went wrong. And for me, and what I heard is developing wisdom is more about learning, not so much from our own mistakes, but from other people's mistakes. And that cultivates wisdom to the nth degree for me. So
I get chills as you say that, because that's one of my little, my children call it dad sayings, is wisdom is the capacity to learn from someone else's mistake. Because it's hard to do, but it certainly saves a lot of heartache when you can. And that's part of what the gift that human community is. We're here for each other. You don't have to suffer the way that I suffered. Let me show you a way, and then you can show me something that I don't know. In those ways, we support one another and grow and hopefully spare ourselves the worst of it.
agreed. Let's get into the Enneagram a little bit. What exactly is the Enneagram, and how do you see it as helping individuals develop greater clarity and maximize their potential
Yeah.
as human beings?
Great question. In a nutshell, the Enneagram is a framework for understanding how humans work. It goes back maybe 2,500 years or more. It found its way through a number of spiritual traditions before making its way into the West and then into psychology. Here's how it works. In a nutshell, the human brain is a threat detection system. When we talk about head center intelligence, we're talking about the capacity to anticipate problems. That's what we do. How do we anticipate problems? Well, we look at patterns from the past and we say, every time a tree branch breaks, it's either a predator or the wind. So how do I determine which one it is? How do I respond? But the human brain, as amazing as it is at cause and effect and anticipation and strategizing, takes 25 years to come online, right? This is why you can't rent a car at Avis or Hertz until you're 25 years old, because it's just not fully ready to do risk assessment and do what it does, which means we need another kind of intelligence. Because when we are born, we need to be cared for. We need to be loved. And so we have another kind of intelligence that has evolved within us that is just as useful, that we call in the Enneagram the heart center intelligence. And the heart center is about connection to other people. It's about emotions and it's about identity, because you can't answer the question, who am I, without talking about your relationships. If I say I'm a dad, I'm a husband, even if I say I'm a coach, those are all relationship answers. And who we are, our identity, is rooted in our relationships. And that's something that from the moment we're born, we rely so much on that intelligence. So there's two of the three intelligences that the Enneagram says human beings have evolved. The third is what we call the body center intelligence. And the body center is about getting our needs met. And where the head center is looking forward and anticipating threats and sort of future oriented, safety oriented. The heart center is kind of reflective. What did I say? What did I do? What did people think of me? What should I have done differently? The body center is fully in the present moment. I don't have to pee tomorrow. I'm not hungry yesterday. These things are needs that I have here in the present moment. And so the body center intelligence is about how things should be. I should be able to get my needs met. The world should be just and orderly. All three of these intelligence centers, every human being has them. We need them to survive in this world. We need them to thrive in this world. But what the Enneagram posits is that we do not all have all three intelligence centers in the same measure. Some people rely more on the head center. Some people rely more on the body center. Some people don't use their feeling center or their heart center as much. So the Enneagram comes up with 9 possible combinations, 9 ways of being a human being, depending on which one of these intelligence centers is the one that you rely on the most, which one of the intelligence centers is the one that you struggle with the most. And I like to talk about it in terms of bowls of porridge, right? We all have a bowl of porridge that's too hot. We all have a bowl of porridge that's too cold. We all have a bowl of porridge that's just right. When we gain some insight into ourselves about how we perceive the world, I happen to be a type 5. Type 5s are head center types. I take the world in, patterns, data, information. My wife is a heart center type. She's a type 2. She takes the world in through people, feelings, relationships. And for the first decade of our marriage, we talked past each other. We couldn't understand why the other person didn't value the things that we valued. We fought. And when the Enneagram came into our marriage, all of a sudden there was a space for compassion, for understanding. This is what matters to her. This is what she sees. I remember one time we were coming home from a dinner party, and my wife turned to me and she goes, I can't believe how we perceive things differently. We respond to things differently. And when we have a sense of why we are the way we are, then we are empowered to make a choice about whether we want to continue to follow into those same patterns or if we want to do things differently. And the patterns of every individual type are not bad or wrong. They serve very well. Every type has gifts. But we want to be intentional about when we follow our patterns and when we don't. And the same is true in our interactions with other people. So when I understand my wife, I can change the way I listen. I can change the way I speak. I can change the way I respond because I have a better understanding of her and the best ways to connect with her and to relate to her. So it's a really practical and powerful and useful tool. And it all comes back to this kind of framework of understanding human beings as having these 3 kinds of intelligence, all of which are essential, but all of which have different values and needs and priorities in terms of how we respond to the world.
You know, the thing that I like about the Enneagram is I think it's a very fluid model. I
Yes.
believe that life circumstances, as we grow, we may become more heart-centered and less head-centered. We may become more relationship-centered. So I think depending on what life deals with us, there's room for flexibility and there's room for change and growth within those 3 specific components of the Enneagram. The other thing is with personality theory, trait theory has been kind of the most popular theory in personality theory, where it's like specific traits that account for individual differences with individuals, and particularly the 5-factor model. But for me, unless you take a look at degrees of those 5 specific trait factors, you're pretty much categorizing individuals as being really open, extremely open, moderately open, or not open at all. There's not any room for flexibility unless you decide you're going to put in facets or talk about facets of those traits. With the Enneagram, there's no need to do that because it's a model that is based on these are the characteristics in each of these subset systems that you mentioned. It's just all the characteristics
Well,
are there, and there is room for growth and development in an area where you may feel underdeveloped.
that's really well put. And I like to talk about how in the world of the Enneagram, all personality characteristics, all traits are value neutral because we can use them in ways that serve us. We can use them in ways that get in our way. The objective of Enneagram growth work is to be able to call on the right intelligence center at the right time.
Yeah.
I remember one day my wife came home from work and she was crying and she was upset. I said, "What happened?" My boss yelled at me. I got in trouble. If I had been responding from my heart center, if I had had the awareness to do that, I would have said, "Do you need a hug? Can I pour you wine? Tell me about what happened." Instead, as a head-centered person, my response was, "Well, did we report it to HR?" Right? It was a very patterned and cause and effect and future-oriented response. So this growth that you talk about that is capable in the Enneagram, this dynamism and flow, is really about saying, when we're in relationship, we should call on the heart center. Do we have the comfort and the capacity and the experience to be able to recognize when we need it and to use it? Some of us need to grow our heart centers. My wife, on the other hand, she actually has to dial her heart center back. It gets her into trouble because it's her too hot bowl of porridge. She needs to cultivate a head center. All 9 types are really working toward getting all 3 bowls of porridge to be the right temperature so we can use the right ones in the right times and in the right places.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. I think the other thing is that, particularly, you're alluding to when couples understand how individuals relate to the world, they can hold space for that. Like you take a look at just what traditional gender-specific work in terms of men and women and how they express emotions. Men and women are just as emotional. Men just deal with emotions differently. They express it differently. They express
Right.
it through different outlets. But once we can understand that there are differences but yet similarities, and we can teach couples to hold space for that, it makes relationships that much, much more fruitful and that much more fulfilling.
Yes, that's really well put. And there's a moment in my work with couples, and I delight in it, where, I think we all kind of graduate childhood with the belief that other people see the world the way we do and want what we want and value what we value and reason the way we reason. And when I'm able to show you a complete, and it has integrity and it has an internal logic to it, picture of your partner, then all of a sudden you go, "Oh, he's different than," but it's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just different. There are different ways to be in the world. And it's really a heart opening, a mind opening, a relationship opening moment to say, he's not wrong, he's not better, she's not bad, she's not worse. We're just different. And then we can begin to work together and find out how those things complement each other. When I first started teaching the Enneagram, I taught with a number of lifelong learning centers. I would have people in their 50s and 60s and 70s coming to me and saying, "Well, I'm a 4. What type should I date? I'm an 8. Who should I date?" I didn't expect to be giving dating advice to folks at that life stage. But what I did offer them was there is no right pairing. Any pairing of any 2 Enneagram types has strengths and weaknesses. They complement each other, they challenge each other. Find someone who's willing to do the work. Find somebody who's healthy, who's balanced, who's striving to be aware and intentional, and the relationship will work itself out.
Yeah, and it's about growth. And if we're willing to grow either apart from a relationship or in a relationship, it's about our willingness to grow, be respectful of other individuals' differences, and find out how we can best, hold space for that.
I tell my couples that everybody grows through life,
Mhm.
as that's what human beings do. So as a couple, you have a choice. Are you going to grow apart or are you going to grow together? You're not going to not grow.
Yeah.
Both individuals are going to grow. So if you want to grow together, that's a choice you have to make, and it requires some intentionality. If you want to grow apart, just keep doing what you're doing, and a decade will go by and you'll look at the stranger across the breakfast table from you.
And it's interesting, Todd. I had a therapist who did a lot of work with couples therapy, and she said sometimes the best outcome can be for a couple to look at each other and say, we really don't belong together, that we really
This
need
is
to go
true.
our separate ways, rather than just stay in the relationship out of loyalty or out of the
Right.
hope that things are going to get better.
And I have facilitated some conscious uncouplings in my work as well. But the Enneagram has even helped in those regards because it helps us to see with clarity and compassion rather than animosity and
Yeah.
anger. And people go, you know what, now that I really understand you and I understand me, I see this maybe isn't right, and that's okay. I wish you the best.
In your experience, what makes the Enneagram really the go-to tool for helping individuals develop clarity and self-awareness, more so than any other coaching tools that you or other coaches may use?
That's a great question. For me, I think the thing that sets the Enneagram apart is that it is not really about your external behaviors. It is about what I call an internal narrative, the story that we're telling ourselves. Because all day, every day, we're telling ourselves, this is what I should be doing. This is who I should be. This is right. This person treated me wrong. People may do the very similar actions for very different motivations. And the Enneagram gets at that internal stuff, those fears, those desires, those motivations, those inner drives. For me, when a person discovers their Enneagram type, it's almost an act of confession. If you take an Enneagram test and it says, oh, you're a type 4, well, you read the profile of 4 and you go, well, this part's right and this part's wrong, and you can kind of pick and choose. But when you claim a type, when you say, I've learned about the Enneagram and my type is 4, you're claiming the ups, the downs, the struggles. You're claiming the path of growth because the Enneagram gives a concrete path of growth for each of the Enneagram types. And there's a liberating aspect to confessing, this is who I am. This is my particular flavor of brokenness. But there's deep hope in that as well. So I think for me, that internal, I can't tell you how many clients I've described their personalities. I think you're a 5. Let me describe 5 to you. And they go, how did you know? I've never told anybody that before. Like, how did you know these things about me? And the fact that it speaks to us so deeply, that's, I think, really where the power of transformation that the Enneagram holds is so valuable. And in relationship too, because when I can do that for you and describe your type, and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe how on the nose you are. And then I say, now let me tell you about your partner. There's an immediate sort of authority. It's like, okay, it was right about me. Let me learn about my partner. Already there's an openness to learn about your partner that if I had just said, let me tell you about your partner, you wouldn't have had. So that insight into ourselves gives us a space to receive insights about others.
Yeah, and particularly when they become empowered to say, boy, that type 5 or that type 4, that describes me. They take
Yes.
ownership of it, and they want to automatically say, how can I improve? How can I use this knowledge to improve the relationships in my life? Not just like with my significant other, but with my friends, with
Yep.
my family, with my siblings. How can this knowledge help me achieve a greater presence in the world and build the type of relationships that I want to build?
That's exactly right. And I use it all the time. I think you shared in the beginning that I'm living here in Portugal. I lost my house in a wildfire in Colorado about 3 years ago. And my family and I decided, hey, let's go on an adventure. And the Enneagram has served me well. There's a good expat community here. But as I meet people, I'm asking myself, what type of person is that? I hear their life story. I'm asking them a question. Oh, this is a 3. Let me relate to them as I know 3s like to be related to. And I form deep connections. I have a lot of great friends here that the Enneagram has empowered me to connect with these people in ways that are authentic, but also we're not guessing at each other. We're not trying to learn how to dance with each other. Like, I know this is the way to talk to this person, and that'll be meaningful. So yeah.
Yeah, I think listening is the key. I mean, I tell my students that I said, if you're going to get a really good sense of where an individual is coming from, don't talk. Just establish yourself as a listener, let the story unfold, and then provide any type of insights or observations with their permission that you see about their story and some possible directions that they could go. But always keeping in mind that the client drives the bus. They're not going to go where they're not comfortable going, and you need to respect that. But if you don't listen first, from my
Mhm.
experience, if you don't use active listening, you can't build a relationship with anybody.
And I teach my clients about curiosity as being one of the most powerful tools in their tool belt. It's really disarming when you tell someone, hey, I'm really curious about what you're saying. Can you tell me more? Say more about this. I talk about double clicking. If your partner says something that you want to know more about, double click on it the way you would if you were surfing the web. Like, I want to know more about this, and ask questions. Hey, why did you say that? I want to know more. Because curiosity is really disarming. It says, I'm not judging, I'm not attacking. I really want to understand. And it's remarkable how our perspective changes when we listen, when we understand. And all of a sudden, we discover that we thought our partner was doing something that was really upsetting us. Turns out it's not about us at all. Now, it still might trigger us. That's a good thing to know about us. But what a different thing to know my partner's not have animosity toward me. They're not trying to sabotage me. But I would only know that through listening.
Absolutely. And, that's the only way to go as far as I'm concerned, because when you have an individual, say, in any type of relationship or communications, what they're saying is, tell me how you got to that particular belief in your life. You're not questioning it. You're not challenging it. You're trying to understand it. And if we could set that as kind of a universal norm for building relationships, the world, I think, would be a more peaceful place. We'd still have our disagreements, but we'd have a level of understanding about what information an individual used to get there. And that can help us really relate to them on a more authentic level.
It's also, when we have an understanding of how people arrived at where they're at, which the Enneagram gives us insight into, it empowers us to, oh shoot, my train of thought has just left the station. Drat. Refresh my memory of what you said just a moment ago, because I was going to build on that excellent comment.
I think basically what I had mentioned earlier was that if we can establish ourselves as listeners,
Yes.
we ask the question, tell me more. We're asking, tell me what resources you use to get to that belief. At least we have an understanding of what the individual's mindset is. And though we may
Yes.
choose to disagree, we do it in a way that's respectful. And if we could set that as a universal norm throughout the world would be a more peaceful place to live in at this point.
I try to help couples to understand that being curious, wanting to know more, doesn't necessarily mean agreeing.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean condoning. And that there's this space we can hold open that says, I want to hear where you're at. I want to receive where you're at. It doesn't mean I'm agreeing with you. It doesn't mean I'm giving you permission. I just care enough to actually hear about where you're coming from. And that's a different space so often. And there's plenty of studies that show when people are speaking, we're only listening to respond. We're holding on to what we want to say as soon as they stop speaking. And that's no way to really get to know your partner and to problem solve the struggles that you guys face together. Got to have that openness, that curiosity.
Absolutely. And curiosity, I think, and the ability to think critically go hand in hand. And we can do critical thinking when it comes to our relationships, and we can do critical thinking when it comes to anything else.
I heard a great expression in Portuguese here, and it was, we are great judges of other people's and great lawyers for ourselves. And I thought that was so interesting that when it comes to our own actions, our own ways of treating other people, we think about intentions and we justify. When we look at how other people speak or act, we're ready to judge. And the Enneagram gives us a space to be like, whoa, they make sense. We don't like it. We don't agree with it, but it's not crazy. It's not mean. It's not wrong. It's just other. And that's a remarkable space to hold open for other. That's, I think, really the gift I would love to give couples that I work with. It's about teaching you guys how to hear and speak and problem solve whatever comes along in your relationship.
Because if we can teach individuals prerequisite skills that they need to solve their own problems, to develop clarity in their own path, the less responsible we become for them and the less work we have to do for them. We've planted the tools and we're empowering them to go forth and apply those. And if they come back to us, it's basically just, I need to bounce something off you. This technique that I used or the strategy I used didn't work as well as I hoped it would. Let's go back to what we talked about with the Enneagram and let's see what I missed in terms of the impression I got of the individual I was working with. Let's see what I can do to improve the interaction for future reference. So,
yeah, I like to say, so the way my program works, it's a 16-week sort of boot camp program Most of my couples stay with me beyond that, just in the manner that you've described. I switch into sort of a personal trainer mode, like, show me your reps. Do we need to increase the weight? I want to see how your form is. Like, let's just check in. We need to add a little bit more. We need to tweak this. We need to tweak that. But it becomes a different function that I serve after that first 16 weeks, because now it's, how do I support you? How do I keep you going? This change we've made, let's make it sustainable, rather than me playing referee. There's no point in that. That's not going to give you what you need for this relationship to last into the future.
Well, I think a really good principle to doing ongoing work with individuals is ongoing assessment. You check to see what's working, what isn't working, particularly after you've introduced a new intervention or a new technique. You need to be able to assess the effectiveness of it. What situations is it working well in? What situations did it not work as well in? And let's see what we can do to tweak, modify, and gradually make some changes so that you can get the outcomes you desire, whether as an individual,
Right.
looking for your own self-improvement goals, or as it relates to relationships that you have with significant people in your life.
Yeah, that's really well put. And, I liken Enneagram work to weeding our garden. Like, in the last home I owned, I had a nice front lawn, but there was a dandelion in the center of that lawn, and I would pull it out in April, and I would pull it out in May, and I would pull it out again in June, and I would fight the same dandelion all summer long. And I realized that my job was not to get rid of the dandelion. My job was to tend to it so that every time it popped up, I was dealing with it. And, as a type 5 in the Enneagram, I'm always going to be a type 5.
Mhm.
But the same weeds grow in my garden day after day, week after week. What Enneagram work is about, recognizing them, knowing how to respond to them in ways that are healthy rather than ways that are patterned or unhealthy. Getting better at being you is really what the Enneagram work is about. It's always going to be with us. We're human beings, and it's everyday work. So everyday assessment is an essential part, or continuing assessment is an essential part of forward movement and growth.
Agreed. And you also mentioned being able to take a test to see what type you fall in the Enneagram paradigm. Are there any tests that you would recommend online that are pretty valid, or is it just like whatever speaks to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are 3 tests that come to mind. But before I give people that, I want to give my 2 cents about tests. When we let an algorithm tell us something about ourselves, there's a distance. And what we're really doing is assessing how good a job did the algorithm do of capturing me. And so as we read the profile that has been provided to us after we've taken the test, all we're really doing is saying, well, it's about 70% right. We look, these things aren't, if we don't like what it says about us, if we don't agree with what it says about us. And so I usually invite people not to enter the Enneagram through a test. I think the better way to do it is to learn a little bit about the system, to learn a little bit about each of the 9 types, and begin to say, well, these 3 sound like they could be me. Let me dig a little deeper. All right, these 2, let me dig a little deeper. Okay, this one. And part of it is, as I said earlier, about claiming it. And so we're not picking and choosing which parts of it we think apply to us. That will make the growth difficult. But the other thing is we have the chance to, as we learn about the Enneagram, to learn about other people.
Yep.
We read about the 9 types. We're looking for ourselves, but as we go around, we go, well, there's my wife. Well, there's my mother. Well, there's my brother. It begins that process of letting the Enneagram improve not just personal development, but our relationships too. So I don't usually recommend tests. That said, the 3 that I think are worth something, the narrative Enneagram, the Enneagram Institute, I think, .com. They have one. It's pretty lengthy, if I recall, 120 questions. TrueSelf.io has one. It's much shorter, and it's interesting because it comes at it visually rather than just with words, which I like. And then there's a really great one from Dr. David Daniels, and I believe the website is just Dr. David Daniels, that is interesting because it is just 9 paragraphs, and you read them and you rank them in order, and they're about how I see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then the order that you rank the paragraphs helps to point to your type. So those are 3 very different types of tests that people can take to begin the journey. But I would advise you, just one last time, learn the whole system. There's so much value in what it says about people and how people function, and not just about you.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes sense. There's an upside to taking certain tests, and there's a downside to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think just becoming familiar with the whole system and trying to just pick where you believe you fall into it. The Enneagram, they explain, the book they've used for the class or referred to. I know the author's last name is Rizzo, and
Yeah.
the book that I'm
Riso and
mentioning,
Hudson, The
Rizzo.
Wisdom of the Enneagram.
Yep. And it explains the types in great detail.
Yeah, it's a thick tome.
It explains it. So I mean, essentially, finding a good resource book on the Enneagram might be better than a test, but in this immediate gratification society, individuals
Yeah.
kind of need to know. Some of them need to know right away. Well, let me just see where I
Well,
fit in.
I do like to, at the very least, give folks a quick rundown of the 9. At least
Mhm.
that in itself is slightly more than what you get from a test that'll just produce one of the 9. You won't even be exposed to what the other 8 types are. And when I do that, I like to talk about the very best and the very worst of those types, because that's really where we spot ourselves. And I invite people to think back, when you were at your best, what attributes did you reflect? When you're stressed and under pressure and nobody's looking, what are the traps that you fall into? And when I describe those, the best and the worst of the 9, it can be insightful to ourselves and others pretty quickly. We see ourselves in those things, recognize ourselves as much as we maybe don't like to. In fact, some people I'll say, the one you like the least, the Enneagram type you like the least, may very well be yours. We have this aversion toward being known in those ways.
Well, and sometimes, viewing individuals who have characteristics that we see as negative, maybe will awaken some part of ourselves that we weren't aware existed. And a lot of times with the negatives that we see in other people, chances are we have experienced those to some extent in ourselves. So essentially it's like looking in the mirror, which makes it more uncomfortable for us to face that.
That's true. And I wish I could say Enneagram work was easy. It's rewarding, but as all personal development work is, and relationship work is, it involves being willing to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
It involves being willing to move into uncomfortable spaces. Growth only happens at the edges. It doesn't happen in the spots that we're comfortable. And so it's extremely valuable. I would never trade a day of the awakening I've experienced and how much my relationships have improved. But it's effort, and in a good way, but effort.
You wouldn't be using the Enneagram if you didn't see really just immediate and really terrific results from the work that you've done with individuals and couples.
That's right. And, to refresh your listeners' memories, the emotional intelligence has 4 sort of pillars: self-awareness, awareness of others, self-management, and relationship management. I wish it could be other management, but we can't manage other people, so we manage our interactions with them. But the Enneagram gives us tools and traction in all 4 of those categories: awareness of ourselves, tools to manage ourselves; empathy and understanding, awareness of others, tools to manage our interactions with them. So as you say, I see results quickly, and that's part of the reason I like the Enneagram so much, because again, as you say, in this instant gratification world, if people have to wait too long before they see a change, they'll drop it and go on to the next thing. And I care about our relationships too much, my own and yours and the people in my life, the clients. I want to give you a fighting chance.
Yeah, we want to see them succeed without
Yeah.
becoming too dependent on us. So we want to
Yep.
empower them to take responsibility for their actions and to leave their legacy in the world.
It's a strange mission to work myself out of a job. Like with every client I take on, my objective is to not have them as a client anymore, which is a strange business model, as you might imagine. But it really is at the heart of what I do, is equipping you,
Yeah.
not being a crutch for you.
Absolutely. And equipping a person to be the master of their own destiny is really what we should all strive for. Because that's a reflection on the empowerment work that we've done as coaches, as clinicians, to allow the individual to find their voice and to make their mark in the world. So this has been an enlightening conversation on the work that you're doing with the Enneagram. So I've got 2 final questions for you.
Okay.
The first is, if you could leave our listeners with one thing today, what would that be?
The one thing I think we haven't really touched on is the power of hope. You know, a human brain, the way that we respond to emotion, fear is one of the most powerful motivators and drivers. And when we are in a fear-based mode of thinking, we often aren't making great decisions. We often aren't terribly aware. We fall into unhealthy patterns. But of all the emotions that humans can experience, the one that is powerful enough to displace fear is hope. And when we experience hope, we have the courage, we have the desire to overcome some of those things that we're afraid of, to try because we believe in what's possible. And so I want to give listeners and my clients hope, to say, listen, the Enneagram paints a picture of what we look like when we're healthy and intentional and balanced and centered. And it's not out of reach. This isn't just for Buddha or for Jesus or somebody to read. This is something that all of us can be striving for. As you improve, as your partner improves, the relationship will improve. So there is hope, and I would love to leave your listeners with that one last word. Hope is powerful, and it's real, and the Enneagram is a big part of that.
Yeah, and hope for a better future will keep us going during trying times.
That's exactly right. It's fuel for endurance.
Agreed. And my last question, Todd, if people want to contact you, find out more about your services and also the weather in Portugal in case they want to take an impromptu trip, how could they best do that?
Well, if you make it here to Porto, Portugal, look me up. I'd love to take you out for a pastel de nata and a francesinha, the special cuisines here in Porto. But really, the best way to connect with me is through my website. That's the name of my company. Connect fully with yourself, fully with the people in your life that matter. We live in a world where we can spell things the way we want, though. So that connect fully is spelled with a K. KONNECTFULLY. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. If you want to, email me directly, todd@connectfully.com. I love to hear people's stories. I'm always learning. As one who learns the hard way, I'm still got my eyes open, and there's much I can be learning. So I would love to hear from folks what their struggles are, what their successes are, and how I can be a part of that.
Thank you, Todd. And all of your contact information will go in the episode notes, both on YouTube and when the audio version releases on Apple,
Great.
Spotify, and the other podcast platforms that I subscribe to. Thank you so much for being just a wonderful guest contributor today to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I enjoyed our conversation and hope we can do this again in the future.
It's been a pleasure talking with you today, Dave. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Todd. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.